Hey guys, it's Kismet. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about my Jester costume. There's quite a lot going on here, so I'm going to split this video into two parts. Today we're going to be talking about the undershirt, the skirt, and the corset. So starting with the undershirt. This is not necessarily a method that I recommend you follow. For one, when I started this, I had the idea that I was going to make an entire dress out of this material and then have a overskirt with the blue. However, as I went on, I kind of realized that I did not buy enough of this tan beige fabric, and I did not want to order more and wait more weeks. So I ended up, this became a shirt, and then this became a blue skirt with like box pleat panels. We'll get to the skirt, but let's talk about the atrocity that is the top first. Because I do want to share this, because even if I don't recommend making it this way, I want you to know how not to do it. Or maybe you see this and this makes sense to you and you do want to do it this way. But I promise you, it's not like the right way to do. So to start, I just measured out a big ol' rectangle and made sure that it went all the way around the outside of my shoulders too. I then took elastic and I sewed that all across the top to make this sort of ruching effect. You want to make sure that you have enough elastic to go from shoulder to shoulder all the way around yourself, and then you want more fabric than that. I think I did around double that amount. I would recommend even doing triple, just because the more fabric you have, the more of a ruching effect you're going to get up here. Oh, the sleeves. Oh, the sleeves. So this is where I recommend you stop following my tutorial. So at this point, I kind of realized that putting sleeves into here was gonna be kind of difficult because I already had the elastic going all the way around the top. I couldn't like add more in because that would make it too big and it wouldn't cinch correctly. So essentially what I did, I cut a hole out of the side of the big rectangle for the shirt, and then I made the sleeve. Here's how I made the sleeve. I made a tube, like you kind of would for a sleeve, and I made sure to have a little bit of a dip, a little triangle, where your armpit would go so that you can kind of account for the, what is it called? The armpit of the sleeve. And then I attached that little triangle for the armpit to the part of the shirt that I had cut out. This is why I say it's kind of confusing. It doesn't make perfect sense. I also did this largely without measurement. I just kind of measure once, cut once, hope it worked it. Because in the end, this is an undershirt and it does not need to be perfect or necessarily good. Most of this is going to be covered up. Something that I did not record any footage of me making was I put a bit of a lace up in the back of this. But how I did this is I cut down the back of it. So I took strips of the white fabric and I made like a little loop. I straight up glued it onto this thing, guys. And then I strung a, again, just a basic lace through the whole thing. It doesn't really support any like to kind of bring you in at all. It's just to sort of adjust the sizing for around the shoulders mainly. If you want a far superior tutorial on how to do this, I recommend checking out Makara Tours. Moving on to the skirt. So the skirt. That's it, that's the whole step. So like I said, I originally had an idea to make an entire dress, and that didn't work because I didn't have enough fabric for like sleeves or anything. Oh, and I guess we're starting with how I did the ombre. So, oh, this curled piece, I noticed that my fabric would curl up if I ironed it after getting it wet. So I just laid it out to dry and then put a ton of books on top of it. Basically what I did is I took a acrylic paint and water mixture and I kind of messed around with it. I used a brush, I used a sponge, and I essentially found that the best way to do it is to get your fabric wet and then sponge on some very watered down acrylic paint and sort of build it up to the saturation that you'd like as far as the color goes. Then for the flowers, I got this really, really pretty applique. I cut out the flowers individually, and then I took that same idea of the watered down acrylic paint and I painted the flowers. I did some parts light, some parts dark. I would like outline the flowers, I would make the stem darker, you can kind of play around with this. Okay, back to the skirt. So essentially what I did is I made a box pleated skirt, which pretty much means you have a waistband that's the length of your waist, and then you have panels that are the blue, and then you have panels that are the white, and then you pleat it in such a way that the box pleat sort of goes in at the white and then comes back out at the blue. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, I'm really sorry. To be perfectly honest, I was never technically trained on pretty much any of this, so it's a miracle that I can explain anything. Let's talk about the corset. So first, I covered the whole dress form in tinfoil, and then I covered that in some masking tape to kind of help make it a little more sturdy. You could also do this with your own body and then have a friend cut you out of it. I happen to have a dress form, so that's what I used. I then took a marker and I marked my pattern all around that masking tape. You only have to draw on one half of your pattern because you are then just going to mirror it for the other half as well. So just make sure that you are very careful about where you put your center seams in the front and in the back. Then I cut this off of my dress form and I cut it into separate little pattern pieces. I then took these pattern pieces and traced them onto the back of my fabric. You want to make sure that you're getting 2 of each pattern piece, but mirrored. So you draw the front of it, you flip it over, and then you draw the back of it. It is also incredibly helpful to give yourself some registration marks where each piece is going to meet up. This way, when you're sewing it together, you're much more likely to have an accurate representation of what you traced on in the first place. It's also good to label your pieces as number 1 left, number 1 right, so on and so forth. Again, just to make sure that you put the thing back together correctly. I then used my rotary tool to initially cut it out, and then I cut off a bit more of the excess with just regular old scissors. I did this process with both my outer fabric and my lining fabric, which was just a red cotton that I had laying around. Okay, the boning. This was very, very interesting. I've seen Makara Tours do this method where she just gets some big old zip ties and then uses that as her boning. Not only is this really cost effective, it's a really good way to sort of test the waters. I myself have never made a boned corset ever, but I did want to make sure I have this sweetheart neckline that I wanted to maintain, as well as a teeny bit of a point at the bottom in the center. And I wanted to make sure that it also gave a little bit of support across the sides, as well as making a shape. So you just hot glue those puppies together. I also took a Dremel and sort of got rid of the sharp edges on these so that it doesn't poke through my fabric at any point. And then this, I put the channels in. This was pretty difficult for me. I had to do it a couple times, but essentially you just lay a strip of fabric over the top of it. At least this is how I did it, so I didn't have to do meticulous measuring. And then you just kind of pin it in place, take the pseudo bone out, and then sew a channel down, and essentially just make a tube for the bone to sit in. Then, once I had all of my channels sewn into my lining, I took all of the bones out and I sewed along the top part of the corset, thus melding them together and making it a full-on corset. I flipped that sucker inside out, I put the boning back into the channels on the lining, and then this was kind of difficult, this part. I ended up having to do sort of like a rolled hem of sorts on the bottom. So I do have a top stitch along the bottom. Currently I don't have a top stitch along the top, but you know, the more I look at it, my lining is kind of poking out. I think I might put a top stitch in here just to sort of secure it down. I think it might also make it look a little more finished, which at first I was kind of worried that it would make it look a little too modern. But now looking at it, it just kind of looks messy. As far as lacing it up in the back, this is not something that I got footage of, but I just took some rivets and I placed them along the back, and then I just have like a regular old ribbon that I strung through here. This really isn't going to do much for actually like morphing you, keep that in mind. This is more of like just a little bit of extra support, giving some structure to the garment. This sort of setup for lacing it is not meant to like pull me in or anything. This is literally just as a closure, because when I was making this, I realized after I made my pattern that I might need a little bit of extra space because I have a lot of layers going on underneath this, as well as just, I think it kind of looks nice. That being said, it's mostly covered up by the shawl anyway, so if you want to just stick a zipper in here or something, do that. It's a little easier, I think. Okay guys, that is part 1 of how I made my Jester costume. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was a little bit informative. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments section down below. Next video, I'm going to be covering the shawl and the belts and extra bits, as well as the horns that I put on Jester's wig. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye!